Man, what a miniseries.
That's a vague sentiment.
Yeah. Man, that's issue 1 has so many covers.
We're gonna talk about comics from Devil's Due. It's something you wondered if Talking Joe would ever do. I guess we'll explain it all to you. Gonna take some time to read the books we've never read. Oh.
Hey, the devil went down to the south coast of England, because here I am. It's me, Mark, who's not in Georgia. Welcome to Talking Joe, the best and longest running dedicated G.I. Joe comics podcast. If you're new to the show, you can find out all of the details over at the website, which is talkingjoe.co.uk. Today, we will be continuing our look at the Disavowed era with G.I. Joe versus the Transformers, Volume 2, Issues 1 to 4 from Devil's Due back in September to December 2004. Now, without any further ado, let me introduce my co-host. It's the ravage to my sound wave. It's Tim Finn.
Hello, Mark, and hello, listeners. I thought you were going to say, hey, it's me, Mark. The devil went to Cybertron and then back in time.
That would have been better. We're talking about G.I. Joe versus Transformers. We talked about the previous one a little while ago now, because that came out. When did it come out? All the way back in 2003. So this is kind of like a year on in terms of publishing timeline.
And Jay Cordray was with us on that episode, right?
Yep.
Hi, Jay. And hello, Jay, in the past when the three of us recorded that episode. The devil went to Cybertron and sent Jay into the future, where he would be listening to this episode.
Yeah, I think this whole time travel thing has really got into your brain box. Let's talk about who created the comic that we're going to be talking about. So the story is from Dan Jolley. And actually, while I'm talking about Dan Jolley, let's pause there and see what Dan Jolley had to say about the creation of this book when we spoke to him last.
Well, there's a funny story to do with G.I. Joe versus Transformers Part 2. Which, that's something that, like, if you're talking to, like, Hollywood executives, mentioning that you've worked on something like that, that tends to come across as a little bit of a punchline, you know, because it sounds like such a manufactured product. You know, it sounds like something done to fulfill some sort of contractual obligation. G.I. Joe versus the Transformers Part 2. But, I mean, I had a lot of fun with it. And Josh asked me for a pitch. And I said, okay, how about this? The G.I. Joe team has to go to Cybertron. And because everything on Cybertron is robotic. There aren't any living beings there as we understand them, or at least not any intelligent ones. The G.I. Joe team has to abandon all of their equipment and go in with just like the clothes on their backs and infiltrate, because none of the sensors or surveillance systems would be calibrated to pick up organic life forms. So it would be like this infiltration story with the Joes overcoming all of this potentially horrible, terrifying Cybertronian stuff using nothing but their wits. And I wanted to call it Blind Spot. And Blaylock said, nah. Nah, it's kind of boring. What else you got? And it kind of harkened back to the to what I have been given to understand was the origin of the Dreadnoks, when, you know, Larry Hama had this basically evil outlaw biker gang smoking cigars and drinking whiskey, and Hasbro was like, no, you can't show people smoking and drinking. And he was like, but they're the bad guys. And Hasbro said, yeah, but it sets a bad example for the kids. And he was like, but they're the bad guys. and Hasbro said, no, you can't do it. And Hama was like, oh, fine. They drink grape soda and eat jelly donuts. How about that? And Hasbro said, oh yeah, that's good. So, you know, it irked me a little bit that Josh really didn't like my pitch. And I said, okay, fine. How about there's a big battle and Teletran 1 gets hit with a laser blast and it malfunctions and it starts zapping the Joes into different time periods. And Josh said, oh yeah, that's good, do that.
So now you have to write this thing.
So we have time travel. but it was a lot of fun doing that. I got to put the different characters in, you know, some cool situations. And I honestly don't remember which one it was in. It was the first miniseries or the second. But at one point, Snake Eyes jumps onto Starscream's face and slices open his eyeball with his katana and shoves a grenade inside it and then backflips off him, and Starscream, the grenade blows up and knocks him off a cliff. And I was like, that is exactly what I wanted to see in the cartoon growing up. So as far as action choreography, that's a high point for me.
Okay, so listeners, yes, you did just hear a rerun excerpt from a previous Talking Joe episode. So if you remembered that, we thank you for your patience and slogging through it again. And if you didn't, you're in good company, because Mark reminded me that we had asked Dan Jolley about this miniseries when we had him on the show, and I had forgotten. So I do appreciate that refresher.
Yeah, you actually tried your best, Tim, at the time to ask him not to talk about it too much. You were like, no, we've not read up to that bit yet.
Also, I'm sure, you know, it's like, we'll do a second episode. We'll pick your brain for 2 hours about this one miniseries in the future. It's Dan Jolley went to Cybertron, and Teletran 3 sent him to the future, where we could do another interview on Talking Joe. All right, so Dan Jolley wrote it. Can you continue with the credits?
So pencils are from issue 1, 2, and 4, Tim Seeley and E.J. Sue, with Tim Seeley layouts on issue 3, and Emiliano Santalucia and Guido Guidi pencils for that issue. And it's, an interesting division of labor here. So maybe, again, let's interrupt the creative team credits and sort of linger on the split here, because I don't know, Tim, if you're aware of this, but there was a book that came out called G.I.JOE vs. Transformers 2 Special Preview 2004 Convention Exclusive.
I did not know that.
And in this book, they showed a little bit of a behind the scenes of the creative process, including some designs, some interviews, and sort of quotes from the creative team.
Can I jump in and guess here?
Go on, yeah.
Okay, because I have a pretty good eye for comics artists, for styles. And when I read issue 1, I thought, okay, after this, E.J. Sue went on to draw many excellent Transformers issues for IDW. And of course, Tim Seeley had already been penciling and would pencil other G.I. Joe comics for Devil's Due. So I thought, okay, I think Seeley is drawing all the people and E.J. Sue is drawing all the Transformers and maybe the vehicles. And then I thought, I wonder if Seeley is drawing all the people and not the backgrounds or layouts on the backgrounds, and E.J. Sue is penciling the backgrounds. And I wasn't sure. I did think from looking at issues 1 and 2 that the backgrounds were a little more interesting and the perspective was a little stronger than in Tim Seeley's solo G.I. Joe issues. So that did lead me to guess that E.J. Sue was doing the backgrounds. And then when I got to issue 3, I was sort of confused because Seeley's doing all the layouts, But then I was certain that one person, Santalucia, was drawing the people, and another person, Guidi, was drawing the robots, because I can definitely tell a Guido Guidi transformer because of all the transformers that he's drawn. So then my question was, were these artists sharing the same Bristol, the same artboards, or was this a case of scanning and two artists working on different materials and then someone photoshopping them together? So Mark, help me out here.
So this is, I think, a quote from Josh Blaylock talking about the creative process. He said, "Then it hit us. Maybe the way to make this book more special as a sequel would be to make the process of creating the book unique. Wheels turning, we looked at our two mainstays, Tim Seeley, artist extraordinaire of G.I.JOE, and E.J. Su, the man who brings the robot warrior Voltron to life each month. What if we had them collaborate on the project, letting them both play to their strengths? So a mad plan was unleashed. E.J. would lay out the story and pencil all the backgrounds and transformers, showing off his skill for creating awesome-looking mecha, and Tim would draw all the G.I. Joe and Cobra characters, bringing the signature look that G.I. Joe fans all around the world knew and loved." And I think in part as well, there's a slight, there's another dynamic going on, which is that Tim Seeley is at the same time as working on this book, also drawing the main G.I. Joe book. So probably not having quite the time to do both books fully. So by splitting the labor, it helps with that. And he also had someone come in on the G.I. Joe book to help him on background. So he's got a bit of help on both of the two books, sort of spreading himself across the two.
And then seemingly by the time issue 3 of this new miniseries hits, E.J. Su is either too busy with Voltron or sort of the book is running behind schedule, because E.J. Su is not involved in the third issue layouts or pencils.
Yeah, they don't talk about that, but yeah, it must be that issue 3 was a crunch, which meant that E.J. Su wasn't so involved in that. I asked E.J. Su if he remembered why he didn't work on issue 3.
Hi, Mark. This is E.J. Thanks for having me to talk about Transformer versus G.I. Joe. I don't really exactly remember what happened with issue 3. If I remember correctly, I think I was falling behind on issue number 2. And in order for me to make schedule on issue number 4, they will still have me skip number 3 and work on issues 4 right after issue 2. That way we could work on 3 and 4 at the same time. And we could make sure the book will come out in time.
But yeah, they talk about essentially that, so it sounds like from the description that they are working on absolutely the same board. E.J. Su said that his biggest concern was that he would have to draw the background before the G.I. Joe characters were on the page. Plus, he wasn't so familiar with every Joe character, so was concerned about leaving too much room or not enough room for the Joe characters. Since he wasn't working in the same location as Tim, once the pages were out of his hands, he wouldn't be able to make any changes. And so the easiest solution was to draw more background than was absolutely necessary. And so if Tim needed more room for his G.I. Joe figures, he could just erase a little bit of background to make it fit. They had a visit together where E.J. visited Tim in Chicago, where Devil's Due was based, to sort of get on the same page, but it sounded like probably mostly just a drunken night out. And so, yeah, it sounds like absolutely that's kind of that very collaborative process. The E.J. Doing the first pass on all of the Transformers, Tim Seeley then filling out the G.I. Joe figures on the page and then passing it across to inker Andrew Pepoy to add finishing touches and bring it all together for colour. And here's E.J. himself describing that process to me.
The project was from so long ago, some of my memory may not be exactly correct, so excuse me if I got anything wrong. When we started working on Transformer vs. G.I. Joe, they will still flew me to Chicago where their office was to meet with them so we can work out a more smooth way to collaborate. What we ended up doing was I would initialize the page layout and work on the pencil. And since Tim will draw the human or the G.I. Joe characters, I would draw everything from the background, robot, cars, and whatever the prop that's in the scene. When I get to the humans, I would draw these humans in very rough stick figures for Tim to fill out when I mail them the pages. I'm sure it was more of a challenge for Tim than for me, since he would from time to time having to redraw some of the panels to fit in with more what the editorial will want, or how, maybe sometime Hasbro would have some kind of change to the comic pages. Tim would redraw some of the panels to make it fit.
This is not the first time that E.J. Su had drawn Transformers. He had a couple pinups published in a book called Genesis, The Art of Transformers, which is a hardcover book of fan art that was published in 2003 by this sort of studio called 88 Miles Per Hour and also Image Comics. And it was going to be like an art book of official Transformers art. And then it sort of just became this hardcover fan art book that Image did. And E.J. Su is in there, and that predates this crossover.
It's also worth noting that this isn't the only time that E.J. Su works on Transformers, because of course he goes on to be the lead artist for Transformers Infiltration when IDW take on the license and launch their own continuity in 2005. I asked E.J. whether he thought that working on the Transformers for Devil's Due might have helped that process.
I'm not sure if my work on Transformer versus G.I. Joe has anything to do with me working on IDW's Transformer. I would think so. At the time, I was also working on a lot of Hasbro internal toy illustration, and as well as some of my illustration on Transformer Genesis. I think IDW has seen some of those work. When IDW, Chris Ryle, the editor-in-chief, emailed me if I want to draw Transformer comics, I was just too surprised to ask any questions. I was afraid if I asked more questions, they would change their mind. I just happily accept the offer and, hoping to do a good enough job to live up to the expectation of the Transformer fans.
Okay, so to continue with the credits, issue 3 has an additional inker besides Andrew Pepoy. That's Sean Parsons. Fun trivia. Yesterday, when I read issue 3, and I thought, Sean Parsons, where have I seen that name before? Yesterday morning, I read the new issue of Legion of X, penciled by Nitho Diaz, inked by Sean Parsons. Okay.
All comes back to Joe.
Right, 15 years later. And then colors on this book are by Jeremy Roberts. And I'm just going to jump ahead a moment here since we're talking about process. The backgrounds on this book are digitally painted over penciled backgrounds. And so they look like animation backgrounds. They look like paintings. There aren't black lines for the edges of buildings or windows. It's just, one color hitting another color with a lot of value. And so two things. One, this looks more like animation. And two, this is how Dreamwave was drawing its Transformers comics at the time. Someone was penciling the characters and the backgrounds, or in some cases, someone was taking credit for penciling the characters, and someone else was penciling the characters, and someone else was penciling the backgrounds. And then someone would ink the characters, and then the color artist colored the characters and digitally painted the backgrounds. So this, even though this is not a Dreamwave book, and Dreamwave was doing its own G.I. Joe and Transformers crossovers with its own deal, with Hasbro and like not approval from Devil's Due. Whether on purpose, I'm guessing yes, or by coincidence, this book does look like the Dreamwave Transformers comics of the day.
Uh-huh.
And then lastly, this is where you would say lettering by Dreamer Design, editor Mark Powers. You take those last three.
And colours on issue 4 were Val Staples, in addition to Jeremy Roberts on the previous 3 issues. Letters, Robin Spehar, Dreamer Designed, and editor Mark Powers. Graphic design by Mike Norton, and military consultation by Andrew Swenson, fitting in there, interestingly enough. But I guess, yeah, Dan Jolley and Brandon Jerwa were sort of friendly. So possibly there was recommendation from Brandon Jerwa to Dan Jolley to make use of Andrew Swenson as a bit of a sounding board / G.I.JOE expert.
Let's have a look at the covers in the gallery.
Normally at this point we would talk about covers. There are an awful lot of covers. I don't know if you totted up the total. I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 total, I think, that would be possible to talk about. So maybe hone in on a couple of your favorites.
Yeah, covers 1A and 1B are they don't technically connect, but they are meant to match, where they are E.J. Sue and Tim Seeley on the A cover. There's a Joe in front of 2 Transformers. One is sort of the Snake Eyes and one's Optimus Prime, and Hawk has an American flag. And then on the B cover, similarly, Cobra Commander is in front of, it's supposed to be Starscream, but to me, if I see a dark gray or medium gray Seeker jet, I'm going to think it's Skywarp, because Starscream isn't just white, he's also red and blue. But anyway, and then there's the Storm Shadow, sort of samurai transformer robot. These 2 covers, particularly the B cover, I grumble a lot on this podcast about over-rendering and over-coloring and too many light sources and unmotivated rendering. And this one's a really good example. Cover 1B, where Cobra Commander and Starscream sort of become one blob. And to some extent, so too does Storm Shadow. The rendering on each of these 3 characters individually is nice or interesting, but it's way too busy. And Cobra Commander's cloth is rendered pretty similarly to this shiny metal on these robots behind him. All right, so covers 1A and 1B, fun ideas, nice compositions, but overdone. And I wanted to zero in for a moment on the cover to 2B, which has the Baroness in the front, looking very cool and attitude-y, and then 2 people behind her. Can't quite tell who. Is it Stalker? I think I see a black guy with a beret, but he's got no mustache. And then a white guy with a hat that's sort of shading his face. So I'm going to say Snake Eyes, ? Behind them are 2 Stunticons. I love the Stunticons. I like that artist Adam Paulina here drew them with really narrow heads, because the original 1985 toys had tiny, narrow heads. This cover is a bit of not a cheat, but an exaggeration, because these are their normal Earth forms, and we only see them in this story in time-appropriate car modes. It's also exciting when G.I.JOE or Transformers sort of can grab a hot or kind of hot Marvel artist to do a cover. I don't think Adam Paulina was under any exclusive to Marvel in 2004. And his style is, his characters are like a little skinny, very tall. It's sort of in that Egon Schiele, Peter Chung mode. Adam Paulina's characters are like tall and like attenuated and skinny. And so it's cool to see an attitude-y Baroness hear from him. The real winner, though, for all the covers for this, the real winner is 4B. Cover 4B is penciled by Clement Sauve, who we've talked about a little bit before on this podcast. He passed away young a few years ago, and he was character designer for G.I. Joe Renegades. And he did a little comics work for Devil's Due. He worked on the start of one of their aftermath sort of superhero universe books called Infantry. And there is, in fact, an ad for Infantry in this very comic book, G.I. Joe versus Transformers 2, issue number 4. This cover, man, I apologize that I don't know how to say Sauve's last name, but he is such a great artist. His anatomy and his composition and his sense of design, this cover where Roadblock has a particular facial type and Lady J has a particular expression, and that's not an easy angle to draw her at because we're looking slightly up at her face. I appreciate that he's not giving her this bare midriff that she's got on the inside of the book, which is sexy and dumb. He draws gear convincingly, but it doesn't distract. You know, there are artists who like to cover characters with pouches and straps and pockets, and sometimes those artists can't pull it off. And this looks detailed and exciting, but like just part of what they're wearing. Roadblock is holding on to this sort of piece of rebar that's sticking out of some blocky thing. And elsewhere on the cover, just to the right of Snake Eyes' visor, there are 3 more of these rectangles with pieces of rebar sticking out of them. John Roche, as color artist, separates these 3 planes where the 3 Joes in the foreground have a red light on them, and he handles it really nicely. And then Shockwave in the background, he's lit from the side with light blue, but the background behind him has some atmospheric perspective on it. The buildings behind him and the sky has a little bit of yellow haze over it. But the sense of danger and excitement, the sense of tension and worry that these Joes are in trouble. Notice how they're not holding weapons here. Snake Eyes doesn't have his sword drawn. And whatever these 3 Joes need to do, sneak past Shockwave, sneak up to his feet, run the other way, this evil sentry in the background can't see them, but he almost can. This is an excellent cover. This is so well composed, so well penciled, so well inked, Serge Lapointe, and so well colored. I didn't love this final issue, and I didn't love this miniseries, but man, this cover, I don't want to say like almost makes it worth it, but this cover is a keeper, and it's so good.
Do you know what my note for the covers was, Tim?
No.
My note was, I don't really want to talk about any of the covers, but man, 4B is beautiful. So,
why did you not really want to talk? Just because there are too many, and I would talk for 30 minutes.
Well, there's so many, and apart from this one, they didn't especially sort of strike me as being, really gripping.
Right.
It was interesting, for example, that one of the covers for issue 1 is sort of in a 70s style, and issue 2 is cover A is in a kind of an Art Deco style, and I think 3B is quite interesting as well. But yeah, this is the highlight. This is the one that jumps out, and probably when we're looking at Devil's Due as an era, there's a few covers that really you'd put in a top 10, and I think this would be one of them. I think another one perhaps might be Dreadnoks Declassified, also by Clement Suave as well.
I haven't really bought original art in a long time. I only own one thing from the entire Devil's Due era, and there's not a lot that I would jump at. And when I sort of sat down to look at 4B, I thought, oh man, this one, but then I wouldn't get the gorgeous, gorgeous color. But just as a black and white piece, oh man, what a great cover. Okay, so I am going to come back to one of the covers when we get to the story, because one of the covers that we haven't talked about really throws me for a loop. I want to say one last thing about all the covers. There's a little bit of weird graphic design logo massaging happening in the word Transformers. The second letter of the second half, the O, right? The letter after F.
Mhm.
The Transformer, the 80s classic Generation 1 Transformers logo type has a thick black outline around all the letters. And for some reason here, Devil's Due's designers have not included the thick black outline on the inside of the O. And that sticks out to me. That line is thin. Okay, let's talk about the inside of the book.
So, plot breakdown time. A MacGuffin called Teltran 3 teleports a team of Cobras and Joes to Cybertron, and at the same time zaps various Transformers to different points in Earth's history, where they have been locked into a vehicle from that time period. This time stream disruption will destroy the Earth, unless the Joes and Cobras work together to return the teleported Transformers back to Cybertron, using special tracker devices and disruption units. The various teams go on their missions. Zartan, Lady J, Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow are sent back to Earth in the 1970s, where they retrieve Jazz, Bumblebee, Hot Rod and Sweeps. Beachhead, Roadblock, Baroness and a Viper are back to 1930s Chicago to retrieve Optimus Prime and the Stunticons. Barbecue, Spirit, Tomac, Zaymot and Dr. Mindbender are in a dystopian future Earth where Ratchet is the one remaining Autobot warrior. Returning back to Cybertron, Shockwave has now captured many of the Joes and Autobots and closed the wormhole, stopping the return of the last remaining team. However, Lady J and Roadblock strip down to their underoos to escape the Cybertronian metal detectors and are able to reactivate the wormhole, allowing the final team of Dusty, Gung-Ho, Shipwreck and the Dinobots to return and defeat Shockwave. The Earth is saved, and the Joes and Cobras return back home. Later, Dr. Mindbender is ushered to a mysterious facility where he meets Cobra La, who have a room full of Unicron relics. Dun dun dun, to be continued, or not, possibly.
And going back 2 sentences, and with Lady J and Roadblock stripping down to their skivvies, Dan Jolley gets to incorporate one scene from his original Blind Spot pitch.
Absolutely.
Top down, your reaction, Mark.
So I'll have a bit of a top down and to say something nice at the same time. I don't have the same attachment to Transformers that you do, Tim. I know you love both of the properties. I was always fond of the Transformers because of the era that they're from, and my best friend growing up loved Transformers. G.I.JOE was published in the UK in the back of the Transformers comic for a while. So I had a lot of exposure to Transformers, but it never really particularly gelled with me. It didn't connect anywhere in the same way that the G.I.JOE property did. So I think generally a Transformers comic is a bit more of a hard sell for me. So there's a slight uphill battle there. You're not going to sort of just wow me by saying, look, it's the G.I. Joes and the Transformers together. I'm not going to go, wow. I'll probably just go, well, that means you've got half as much G.I. Joe as you would have otherwise. So it's not necessarily an easy pitch for me. But all of that said, I give the book a fair shake. And what I really liked about this book was the look of it, and particularly the colors and the animation style that you were talking about before, where you had that sort of more detailed, sort of almost painted background without the black inks, so that it looks like an animation background. And in that preview interview with Tim Seeley, he talked about what the influence was for the book, and he said that he was trying to treat it like it was the original 2 cartoons crossing over, trying to keep it close to the roots and the classic look of the characters. So for example, that you didn't have the Superman Spider-Man crossover where you've got Superman in his Superman blue electric costume and Spidey in a scarlet spider suit. Keep it to the iconic look. And yes, you can tell kind of from the character designs and stuff that they're sort of, not being too slavish to any particular era or design. They're kind of going with what they enjoy the look of, a lot of the iconic looks. And like Cobra Commander, I think his look is sort of plucked from the kind of reloaded look of Cobra Commander, where he's got that big black sort of leather trench coat, and Mindbender is that sort of purple lab coat, Devil's Due look, which is fairly effective. And yeah, the story zips along. It's enjoyable, no complaints really, and that'll be my, I guess, faint praise for it.
I have some complaints, but let me start with what I like about this. I like that because of a healthy explanation at the beginning of issue 1, you don't have to have read the first crossover from Devil's Due, or in my case, you don't have to have remembered it.
Yeah.
When I sat down, I thought, what do I need to know from the first one? And even though we did a whole episode about it, all I could sort of remember was my impression of reading the first issue when it came out. Like the first couple pages where, Cobra Commander and Cobra find the crashed Ark. And then I thought, where did that end up? But fortunately, the first page of this new crossover catches me up. Number 2, I really love the approach to the art. It doesn't always quite work, but it's much harder to split up the art chores this way, particularly if you have a penciler for one set of characters and another penciler and an inker, right? It would be easier if, one penciler did some of the work and then the other penciler finished penciling it and inked it. And there aren't a lot of parallels to this. What this reminds me of is 2009 Image United miniseries. And certainly G.I. Joe versus Transformers 2 came first. And certainly this is not the first time that an artist has penciled something and handed it to another artist who has penciled other things on the page. So, E.J. Sue and Tim Seeley didn't invent this, and the Image founders didn't reinvent this. But there's this miniseries where the remaining Image founders, plus Robert Kirkman, who's now in effect an Image founder, we're going to write and draw and pass the Bristol, the artboards back and forth so that, only Todd McFarlane was penciling Spawn on all the panels where Spawn showed up. And then he'd pass the pages over and, only Jim Valentino was going to pencil Shadowhawk, where Shadowhawk is punching Spawn or getting punched by the Savage Dragon or whatever. So it's harder and slower. It's really fun. Okay. So in terms of story, I certainly remember that the main Devil's Due series is meant to be a mix of the animated series from the 80s and the Marvel continuity, right? Where you get things like Extensive Enterprises that were only in the cartoon. And with that in mind, as the story progresses over issue 1, I realized, Dan Jolley, whether he's meaning to or not, is writing this like a G.I. Joe 5-part miniseries, where the characters break into teams and go to different places to retrieve or do things, right? So in the first miniseries, they have to find the 3 fuels for the mass device. In the second miniseries, they have to find the pieces of the Weather Dominator. In the third one, they have to place or stop placement of the control cubes for the Pyramid of Darkness. In Arise Serpentor Arise, it's raiding tombs or stopping Cobra from raiding tombs. Even in Operation Dragonfire, right? It's finding the Dragonfire. So this is really fun because that is a story structure that I understand and like. But having Joes and Cobras and Autobots and Decepticons, it's too crowded. And there are 2 issues of this that don't work for me and 2 issues that mostly do. And sort of halfway and then 75% of the way and then 95% of the way through this, I thought, did I miss an issue? Or is my copy missing pages? Because I feel like we just made a jump or something hasn't been explained. And I want to point out that at the end of a previous episode, when Mark and I were figuring out what we would talk about in our next episode, Mark said, Master and Apprentice 2. And I said, no, G.I. Joe Transformers 2. And he said, okay. And I said, are we going to do it in one episode? And Mark said, yes. And I said, all 6 issues? Because, that's going to be a 3-hour episode because I'm going to spend 40 minutes just talking about the covers. And and I was remembering incorrectly. This crossover is only 4 issues. But here's the thing I love. Issue 1 is double-sized. So it is in effect 5 issues, right? The cover prices are $2.95. Issue 1 is a $4.95 comic. And it's 40 or 42 pages long. So that's good. and then at the end of and then in issue 3, right? Here's how confused I got. I started to think, because the story was being crunched and truncated in such strange ways, I started to think, did Blaylock rewrite some of this for Dan Jolley? Did Blaylock halfway through tell Dan Jolley that he had to do something different, right? Because, in recent episodes, we've talked about how Brandon Jurawa's the end of his run on the main book was shortened, so he had to change things and rush things, and there were some issues earlier in his run where Blaylock is co-writer. And some of those feelings started to occur to me at the end of issue 3 on the Devil's Due news page, right? This is the page after the final page of comics. On the very bottom, it says upcoming books, right? And it lists 2 months, November, right? And November includes issue 4, and then December. And December includes a comic book, G.I. Joe versus the Transformers Volume 2, issue number 5. Now, that may just be a typo. Maybe there was never going to be an issue 5, or maybe it was going to be 5 issues and they decided to pull them all forward and turn 2 and 1 into a double-sized 1. But, so this may just be an isolated typo on the, checklist page and have nothing to do with story or editing story. But we can and will get into it more specifically, but this overall sort of didn't work for me because it was too crowded and there were some either plot holes or things that were underexplained for me.
Yeah, I suspect that because, these things have to be solicited 3 months in advance and there weren't any solicits for number 5, there would have been preview covers and things that would have had to have been produced. I think that must surely be a typo. When you were talking about collaborative or other creators chiming in on the plotting, it reminded me that there was something that Dan Jolley had said, again going back to the preview issue. He said when talking about where to place each chapter of the book, he said, I tried to think of times and settings that would be a lot of fun to use, in which we could get good reactions from the Joes and Cobras involved, and that would allow for some really entertaining action. I had all of the locales mapped out, but then Josh, E.J, Tim and I sat down and started brainstorming, and Tim made a really, really good suggestion that strengthened the story considerably and totally trashed one of my settings. So I had to back up a little and work in a different direction. Damn you, Seeley, and your good ideas. It's a reminder, I guess, that Seeley isn't just an artist, but is also a writer and is, in fact, nowadays more known for his writing than his art. I wonder which locale it was that was Seeley's idea that wasn't on Dan Jolley's original mapping. And I actually asked Tim Seeley that very question when we caught up with him.
I don't know. I don't remember. I mean, I remember the cool thing about that one, and Dan is an awesome writer, and one of the best I worked with. I remember he was really open to things that were visual ideas, because he would just be like, I don't know, I gotta write the dialogue and come up with a plot, but if you got something cool to draw, just do it. So I don't remember I don't remember. I know we talked a lot about if we're gonna do time travel stuff, we gotta do a 1930s gangster Transformers, and at the time none of that stuff, that was the first time it had been done. So did I add the time travel to the future one? I did. I added the let's go to the future and see that's right. Okay, there we go.
I thought it might be.
Yeah.
That future one is a bit of a horror element.
Yeah, that might be the one. But Dan is a horror writer, so I'm pretty sure, wasn't it that we were going to have, they were making Energon out of people? I think that might have been what I don't remember. It was a long time ago. But I remember we threw around some weird ass ideas that the Transformers were eating people, turning them into, draining their blood and turning them into Energon and stuff. I don't remember.
I want to say one other thing about breaking this down into sort of chapters or phases. So issue 1 is double-sized. The first 2/3 of it are about getting the Joes and Cobras to Cybertron, having Teletran overload, zapping characters, and then them deciding what to do about it. And then the first sort of mission right? So you could sort of, if this is like Revenge of Cobra Part 1 or The Weather Dominator Part 1, I don't actually remember where in Part 1 the Weather Dominator flies up into space and breaks into 3 parts, and then they say they have to break off into teams and go find it. But if you've got the Weather Dominator, it's got 3 pieces, right? If you have a 5-parter, this might suggest a story structure like, okay, Destro's using the Weather Dominator in Part 1. It breaks into pieces at the end of Part 1, so we now have 1 episode for each of the 3 parts, although we may like slide them forward and back a little bit to have overlapping stories. And then Part 5, it's going to get reassembled and there'll be a big fight for control of it, right? That's one possibility. Okay, so issue 1, the first sort of mission, the first not just place, but time and place, the 70s, it's the final 10 pages. And that scene felt rushed to me.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, Lady J is inside Jazz, and they're convincing this red car with this human, and the red car ends up being Hot Rod to chase them. And they pull into this warehouse, which turns out to be a hangar because it has a plane in it. And this is just a couple pages from the end of issue 1. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 humans who all have like long hair and mustaches and suspenders or I guess they're holsters and like white button-up short sleeve shirts and ties.
Yeah, think Beastie Boys Sabotage video.
No, exactly. And I thought, who are these guys? It's not explained, right? Are these are these criminals? Are these like businessmen? And it's a hot day and they're wearing short sleeves. Like none of them flash badges. Like, is this a chop shop? Are they like stealing cars? Are they like drug dealers? And this little plane, this private jet is for them to take drugs somewhere. Like they all have pistols. So, but I actually thought like, are the writer and artists of this series just hoping I recognize this reference to the Beastie Boys Sabotage video? It's like I'm sitting in a library and Dan Jolley and like Tim Seeley are like elbowing me like, it's the 70s cops, like 70s cops, sabotage, right? Like, oh, okay. So like, yes, it's fun, but A, it's not even underexplained. It's just not explained. And B, I sort of don't know what to do with it. Like, one of them says, all of you stop right there. And another one says, hands on your heads. And I think, okay, this sounds like law enforcement. Mm-hmm. And then after everyone disappears back to Cybertron, there's this empty hangar with these 5 humans and some like little lightning wisps. And one of them says, how do we report this? And I thought, to who? Who are you? Are you FBI? Are you CIA? Are you local PD? Are you like, is this like a cute Easter egg? Are you actually the 3 Beastie Boys and the other 2 guys who are in that video? This needs more thought. This needs more real estate. This needs different dialogue. And so where issue 1 is already sort of too crowded for me as I'm reading it, because you have like Joe's fighting cobras at the beginning. And then there's this thing I don't quite understand where a couple pages in, there's a red ninja hanging on the back of this like troop transport. And it's a female and her head is like covered up and she has a sword. And I thought, oh, that must be Jinx.
Uh-huh. Yep.
And then 3 pages later, there's this giant like mech. There's this giant mecha that's talking and it's sort of red and dark gray. And it refers to the one next to it that's like black and dark gray. It refers to the black and dark gray one as Snake. I swear, Snake, you're having way too much fun with that thing. And I thought, is this Jinx? Because I see like a giant robot that's a person, not a transformer, I think. So I think that's Jinx because like the other one is Snake Eyes, or like Snake Eyes is like pet robot. But like there's no panel where I see like Robert Downey Jr.'s face with a bunch of holograms in front of it. Like, oh, I'm inside Iron Man's helmet okay, I know that Tony Stark is piloting this Iron Man costume, whereas all the other Iron Man costumes flying around in this scene are empty drones. Oh, and that one is War Machine. Oh, Rhodey's in that one, right? So there's no like pilot cockpit shot of this. So like, okay, that's definitely Jinx. And no one calls this character Jinx, or no one's like JNX01, like, and then Jinx runs in with like a radio control. She's like, my giant 50-foot robot did the mission. So like, I don't know where these two robots came from.
Yeah.
Your turn.
I had the almost exactly same thought process. And Jinx, I don't know if it's just that one panel where he sees her on the back of the truck. What struck me as being strange is that I don't think we see that character anywhere apart from that one panel, because the character who's jumping through the glass is then Spirit, and then the mechas that you were talking about. So this is a kind of callback to the very end of series 1, where sort of one of the concluding scenes of that is that shows the G.I. Joes lined up in these mech suits using the kind of Cybertronian technology to have developed their own mech suits. And one of those is Snake Eyes, and that is the same design that we see here in the black one. So that's snakes.
So
Again,
my bad.
It's not really. It's
my
a
bad.
callback to a series that in real time you wouldn't have read, possibly until a year previously. So remembering that particular panel, maybe a bit of a stretch. But the orange one, I think, is a brand new character that wasn't in that particular scene.
What you're saying orange is the one I was saying is red.
Yeah.
The one standing next to Snake Eyes. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm seeing an orangey red, and I think that is probably barbecue because of the sort of orangey color, and because one of the characters who features relatively prominently in the rest of the series is barbecue.
Oh yeah, and you know what? The eyes and the mouth look like barbecue's helmet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
it definitely doesn't say anywhere that that's who he is, but
that's my
conclusion.
There are times when I read a Larry Hama G.I. Joe comic where I think, man, these characters sure are conspicuously using each other's names, Mark. But then I think,
sure do, Tim.
But then I think, it's like the old Jim Shooter rule at Marvel in the 80s that every comic is someone's first. And so fundamental things get re-explained every issue. With my healing factor, my razor sharp claws, and my unbreakable adamantium skeleton, Mark, I'm the best there is at what I do, even though what I do isn't very nice. So I could use a little bit more conspicuous name dropping, name calling, naming. Not even in this miniseries, in this first issue. So then we get to Cybertron.
Can I hover over an idea as well? So
yeah.
So you mentioned as well that some of that 70s scene is a little bit strange or not fully explained. I wonder whether maybe this, talking to your point earlier, that maybe this might have been designed as being a slightly longer series, and they condensed some of it, and some of that condensation. I don't know if that works, applies, but or it just results in moisture. But anyway, that condensation.
My Mint comics
meant. Oh no. It's warping. The resulted in some of the confusion in this issue, because it does feel like, particularly that scene where they're in that hangar with the airplane and those police or whatever they are. It feels like there's something that maybe was in there originally that would have made more sense, and possibly that has just been chopped back to its core components to get everything into the issue. Who knows? But that could be something. Okay,
so I wanted to make a comparison. So pages 17 and 18 of issue 1.
Tell me what's on them.
This is where it's 2 pages facing each other. The Joes are in a truck, Boston, 17 hours later, and they are heading towards a nondescript building, and there's some flashing lights inside it, and then the Joes head into this building, and this is where they find Cobra experimenting with this wormhole technology on Earth before they go to Cybertron. And So the first page is this truck driving. There's a silent panel of the Joes with their weapons drawn, sitting in the back of the truck, and then in the driver's seats, Lady J and Stalker say, "That's it, dead ahead." Huh? Doesn't look too impressive. And then the first panel of the second page of this, page 18, 3 of the Joes are right outside. There's a chain link fence. Lady J says, "Move it on the double, every entrance, ready," and they kick the doors open. Go. And I thought, man, this is not a Larry Hama written scene. And I don't have a particular comparison at my fingertips, but I feel like if you've read a lot of Marvel Hama G.I. Joe issues or IDW Hama G.I. Joe issues, there would be a different arrangement of dialogue and exposition for what these Joes who are about to infiltrate a building where they think the bad guys are doing something nefarious. Like there would be some jargon about like access points or like vectors of entry, or it's like, well, we're going to have someone spotting with the sniper rifle up on the building across the so-and-so, or like Alpha team is coming in through the skylights and like Bravo team is going in through the front door, but like Chuckles and the Awe Striker is going to be like parked at the back door. And again, I think whether he intended to or not, Dan Jolley is basically writing 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 episodes of the cartoons mushed together. And that is a different style of writing dialogue. There's less jargon. And not every scene needs to be compared to Hama. And I'm not even saying this is bad. I just thought, oh, wow, this, like, sometimes I'm sort of looking for that specific, like, how does this feel very different from many of the other G.I. Joe comics that I've read? And this one really jumped out at me. Like the scene where they all get teleported through time as Teletran 3 zaps them with like magic lightning. I wasn't like, oh yeah, Hama wrote a scene like that in Wolverine where Wolverine travels back to, actually Hama did write a scene where there's a time storm back in Wolverine 30, 31, 32 or thereabouts. Anyway, never mind. Okay. And then there are two sort of story beats in issue 1, which are also sort of underexplained, or the dialogue isn't linking to the visuals enough. So those 2 pages I just referred to with the warehouse, that's 17, 18. If you turn your page to 19, Cobra Commander yells, Lady J fires, she's holding her pistol and she fires. And then in the next panel, it's Starscream, although again he's colored like a dark gray, so I'm like Skywarp, and Mindbender's screaming, right? No, stop, don't shoot. Okay, and then there's an explosion, and that's when they start to get zapped. So page 20, they're getting zapped. Turn the page 21, and Mindbender in the middle says, "I'm saying that grenade caused an energy surge," and I thought, what grenade? Turn back to page 19. Okay, Lady J is definitely not holding an under and over, right? She's not holding Leatherneck's machine gun. She doesn't have a bloop gun. She's got a pistol. Oh, there's a grenade in the middle panel just over Starscream.
Oh, good grief.
But it's very dark, and it sort of disappears in the like light and dark of the like background color, ceiling darkness, and the lights streaking off the like glowing sphere of the like Cobra wormhole experiment. And so I do see a grenade, but again, in that panel, Mindbender, he's saying what you'd say. He's saying don't shoot. He doesn't have to be so specific, like don't shoot and or hurl grenades. But also in this panel and in the previous panel, no one is actually throwing anything. There's no like, I just threw a thing, baseball pitcher pose. And so then I thought, okay, I guess Lady J did have a grenade launcher that's like the size of a pistol after all. Like, I don't know. So that's one.
It also doesn't seem like it's a very responsible thing to do, is to be chucking a grenade into like a crowded room with a big electrical doohickey in the middle of it.
Yeah. So this is not a good explanation. This is not a good no prize or rewrite. But if earlier, when they're driving there in that truck, one of them is like, I'm a new Joe. I'm inexperienced. I can't wait to blow some stuff up. Or someone's like, I'm the new G.I. Joe grenade trooper, and my specialty is throwing grenades. Or one of the Joes says, I'm so upset about what happened in the first crossover miniseries, even though I'm going to follow the parameters of the mission. I'm going to do maximum damage. And she's holding a grenade. Like, I need something else. At minimum, I just need to see that grenade on page 19 because it completely disappears. And
tiny.
If you are reading this, if someone like scanned a printed comic book and you're reading this on your monitor, I bet you can't even see it at all. I feel like that's the kind of thing that just disappears in like the increased contrast of scanning glossy pages. Okay, and then this kind of thing sort of happens again where a couple pages later, so characters have been zapped and Perceptor shoots Starscream with his lasso, and then there's there's a page of Perceptor and then Ultra Magnus just explaining things, right? Cobra Commander, I see Optimus Prime's use of the word. Oh, I should actually do my my Perceptor voice. Cobra Commander, I see Optimus Prime's use of the word imperious was an understatement. Sort of sounding like a beetle. I'm sorry. So he keeps talking, and then Baroness says, "What kind of feedback?" And Perceptor explains the rules of the next 3 comic books, and I thought, oh no. Yeah. And then Ultra Magnus continues to explain it, but also why like they're going to sort of hold off the fight in this room with Teletran 3. And then Tomex and Zaymot say something. Okay, so 2 more pages ahead, there's a bunch of Ultra Magnus dialogue, and now that we see the teams getting divvied up, we see a panel with like the first team, we see a panel with Viper, Baroness, Beachhead, Roadblock. We see a panel with, okay. And then they start to get zapped away, right? And Lady J says, I think it's Lady J. It's either, I guess it's Lady J at the bottom of the page, but she no longer has a bare midriff. Anyway, no, that's Baroness without glasses? I don't know. Okay, so we go, okay.
Which page are you talking about?
The page that starts with we're looking down at Perceptor and 4 of the humans, and Perceptor says, "As far as I can glean from Teletran 3," this is on the right side. Sorry,
someone says no pressure.
Yeah. On the final word balloon is no pressure. I can't tell who that is. That looks both like the Baroness. That looks like a miscolored Baroness and also a misdrawn, and I guess it's the Baroness without.
I think it must be Cover Girl.
Cover Girl. Okay. There. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to come back to this page in a minute. So let's go ahead. Okay, 8 pages. Lady J is holding an Autobot sigil as she pulls a guy out of a car, out of the red car that then transforms as Hot Rod. Right, so we're in the Beastie Boys Sabotage like music video shoot in the warehouse, and Lady J is holding what looks like a very small like novelty magnet that you would stick to the front of a car, like the hood ornament for an Autobot sigil, and I guess she's going to put it on the top of the car. And I thought, what's that? What is she doing? And then let's go back to that page, which ends with no pressure, right? So Perceptor says, "By combining that data with a maintenance protocol designed by Ratchet to detect system viruses, I have been able to fashion tracking devices for you, as well as disruption units, which should reboot their systems, allowing them to transform out of vehicle mode." Oh, cool. There are 2. I take slight issue with your description of Teletran 3 as a MacGuffin, but we can come back to that.
2 more MacGuffins, yeah.
Here are 2 more MacGuffins, and I sort of feel like instead of this page where we see like these like dramatis personae panels, it's like, here are the 4 characters that are gonna go to Chicago. Here are the 4 characters that are going to go to so-and-so. Here are the 5 characters that are going to so-and-so. And then here are the last 4 characters that are going to go to the future. I feel like someone should be holding one of these devices, or Perceptor should be handing one of these devices to someone, right? Like this page, it's not a splash page that wants to be sold for more money, the original art. Like this is not a sexy splash page. It's not a fight page, but this page is still definitely drawn more with an eye towards like cool shots of characters just standing there than what the story actually demands. And one of the characters is describing 2 important and distinct props. A, I would love to know what they look like. B, this is a place for some like funny sort of joke where they're like, one is like big because Ratchet designed these. Ratchet designed a disruption unit and a tracking device. Like, how did they know that they would need to be like the size of a Coke can? It's like maybe they're the size of like my backpack because they fit in Preceptor's hand, not like on his pinky. And then later on in the issue, and at the beginning, I think of issue 2, when the like time teleported Joes and Cobras do use these tracking devices, we like see one from behind and I'm like, what's that? And I start to think that maybe they're the same thing, that like the front of it is an Autobot symbol and the back of it has some like tech. So my top down at the beginning was that there was too much going on. There were too many characters, and this, even though I like issue 2 and 3 a lot, overall this doesn't work for me. And with these like 3 or 4 sort of story and like staging and directing problems in issue number 1, that is my proof.
I had a similar sort of thought process to you, Tim. It's funny sort of going back and sort of and being, exactly on the same wavelength there, that I was reading this story and sort of seeing that sort of Autobot sigil which turned Hot Rod back into the car. And I was also reading the story and thinking, how do they know where to go? What are they doing with this thing to transform them back? And they're going, oh, right. That enormous amount of text coming from the and exposition coming from the Autobots was probably quite important to the story. I think I actually need to go back and read that properly rather than skimming over it, because I do have a habit, like probably most, that if you see a massive block of text on a page, I'll kind of skim it. And that's definitely what happened here. And I missed some key plot points on the initial reading that I had to go back and actually understand and incorporate in my plot briefing.
To be fair, a couple pages earlier, before Lady J puts the little Autobot magnet on Hot Rod, on page 30, at the bottom, Snake Eyes is holding an Autobot sigil, and the guy in yellow with the hat, who's like either a pimp or like an archetype for a pimp, the guy with the big hat and the cane and the long coat, he says, hey, hands off the ride, creepy looking turkey, I'll cut you. And my note here, by the way, I appreciate that Tim Seeley draws Snake Eyes here with his head low, so that his hat brim is casting a shadow on his face, like the flashbacks to Vietnam and the Marvel issues. I appreciate this. Thank you, Tim Seeley. Good. And like, there's no story reason why when they get clothing that makes them blend in, Snake Eyes would pick era-specific black clothing and Storm Shadow would pick era-specific white clothing. But that is definitely a cheat or a device that I can get behind. Like, yes, help me out. Who are these guys? Okay, so let's
point out as well, Storm Shadow is in John Travolta style Saturday Night Fever white disco suit.
Right. But my note here when I read this is I didn't know if Snake Eyes was putting the Autobot symbol on this car or taking it off. And to be fair, the art does suggest he's putting it on more than he's yanking it off. But the guy behind him does say, hey, hands off the ride, which sort of indicates that he just put his hand on the ride and, I don't know, wiggled a hood ornament and yanked it off. And so this is where it's like, oh, you got a page full of dialogue or 2 or 3 pages full of dialogue where Preceptor is explaining how the mission for the rest of the miniseries is going to go. It's like, well, there's already too much dialogue and things are over-explained. Why not one more dialogue one more word balloon where he says, put the disruptor units on each car? Or maybe he does, and I, like you, sort of skimmed it yesterday and was like, ugh. So I also think that the take on, this isn't just issue 1, this is all the issues. The take on a couple Joes and Cobras getting put in specific times is too broad. I don't mind that it's played for some laughs, right? Like they show up there and, they get to the 70s and Lady J says, well, I guess this answers the question of when. And Zartan says, ugh. And Lady J says, what's the problem? And Zartan says, listen, you three are young enough. You weren't really involved, but I had to deal with leisure suits and pet rocks for a whole decade. And we sort of see a POV shot because they appeared into an alley. So now they're looking out of the alley and they see a few people in front of them out on the street, on the sidewalk, walking back and forth. And like someone has bell bottoms, I guess. And like, that's funny, but I feel like this reference, this joke, this pop culture, like, oh yeah, the 70s were about leisure suits and pet rocks and the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack and like disco. Yeah, but that's sort of like, oh, you remember in the 90s when like everyone in America dressed like Kurt Cobain? Like, nope, that's not what happened. It's like my dad didn't, and like I'm sure your cousin didn't, and like in the 90s, my like 8th grade teacher didn't. And then 4 years later, my 12th grade teacher didn't. And so I feel like the joke here is actually much more mild, where Lady J says, I guess this answers when. And Zartan says, I remember this. Like what fashionable days those were. Or something like, yes, it wasn't the best time for fashion, but as a master of disguise, I'll make do. Like something like that. Not just like the broadest possible. It's sort of like, again, I'm like sitting in a library somewhere reading this comic, and like Dan Jolley is like sitting next to me and he's elbowing me and he's like, 1970s references. Leisure suits and pet rocks for a whole decade. Like, nah, too much.
My reaction to those two panels was where, well, I guess this answers the question of when. Does it? Does it though? There's like, there's a panel and someone's got bell bottoms on it. Is that is that knocking it directly on the head in a non-subtle way that this is the 70s? You know, realistically, it could be almost any decade, couldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't pay attention to fashion, but I have started to learn that a lot of fashion is really a lot of fashion trails. You know, it's like, you know, in the early 60s, people were still dressing like the late 50s, and like, you know, like disco's the 70s. Disco's also like 80 and 81 and 82. Like there wasn't a hard edge. There wasn't a line where it stopped. You know, it's like people were like cutting their hair and wearing like fewer bell bottoms or smaller bell bottoms, right? And so I think we were supposed to take many cues from this one panel. It's like, okay, there's a Volkswagen Beetle, and whatever light blue car is on the left is supposed to be a very 70s car. And then the blonde woman who may be walking a dog or her pet rock, I don't know, there's a word balloon in front of it. She has bell bottoms. And then the guy behind her, I think, is supposed to have an afro, but like he's very small, and like it is a lot to ask of any artist, Tim Seeley or anyone else. It's like, okay, I'm giving you 1% of the entire page, like 3% of the entire page. That's how much real estate you have to draw 2 or 3 or 4 characters that are going to demonstrate what the fashion of this era is. That's very clear. And it's like, I think this either needs a close-up or a couple more panels. And I was, you know, maybe you'd say like dialogue that spells it out, and that's what this slightly overwritten Zartan dialogue is for.
A common shortcut for this type of thing is for them to be in front of a cinema and you can see what's playing from, right, you know, and it'll be Saturday Night Fever or, you know.
Right. Or I also feel like I've made this comment once or twice before on Talking Joe, where I feel like someone is writing and someone is drawing a scene that as comics is not communicating everything that it would if they got to film and edit a scene of a movie or a show where you'd have sound effects and like music. And it's like, do you guys want Saturday Night Fever to be playing in the, like, do you want a Bee Gees song to be playing in the background? And like, do you want a quick montage where we have like a close-up of that woman's like jangly earrings, and then a close-up of her bell bottoms, and then a close-up of the guy's afro, and then a close-up of the Volkswagen? Because you can do that with panels, but like this isn't a TV show or a movie. And so all you've got is dialogue and panels. So that's what I'm going to say about issue number 1.
You also said you also mentioned Zartan being a master of disguise just there, and I found it slightly hilarious that his 70s era disguise is like I think it's like a flat cap and sleeveless jacket, but mostly just giant black makeup around his eyes still.
I mean, wouldn't the joke be if it's the 70s and they're like doing these tropes, he should just dress up as a member of KISS? Because he's already 2% of the way there. All right. So issue 2, I love the stuff with the Viper, who A, is funny and gets to panic when no one else is, and B, gets to be us. Because he's on page 2, I'm sorry, I'm just having a little freaking trouble with this, okay? I mean, I was all right with the giant transforming robots. I was even handling it when we got zapped to another planet. But time travel? This is insane. I thought, that's fun. And I like that he pops up a few more times and gets to do something, and then Roadblock or Beachhead or Baroness sort of shuts him down. And issue 2 worked as a strong unit where it's 22 pages and I'm not going to count, but 16 or 17 or 18 of them get to be this like Tuesday of the miniseries, or maybe Wednesday if we're counting the 70s, right? So we're in like 1937 Chicago, and almost the whole issue is the mission with Beachhead, Roadblock, Baroness, and one Viper, and also one Autobot and 5 Stunticons. And when I got to this issue, I thought, okay, issue 1 really needed to be 2 or 3 comic books where we have the mission on Earth, we have them go to Cybertron, and then we have characters zapped through time, and then the first mission to the 70s. And I'm going to jump ahead. By the time I got to issue 4, I thought, you know what? This should not have been 5 issues. Technically, it's 5 issues worth of comics. I thought, you know what? This shouldn't have been 6 issues. This actually should have been 12 issues. And I don't think Devil's Due they didn't want to make that deal because that's more money for the license. That's a lot of wrangling of talent and the pipeline. It's like, oh, well, then someone else will have to do issues, 7, 8, 9, because like Seeley's drawing the book and E.J. Sue's got to go back to Voltron or something. But there are so many characters, so many locations, several MacGuffins, and so many scenes which are crowded and rushed. And this doesn't compare to the Tom Scioli Transformers versus G.I. Joe at all. But you think of other times that the Transformers and G.I. Joe have met, and it's like 4 issues, Marvel, 1986, 1987, not enough, but there's a lot more like dialogue and a lot less, there's a lot more compressed storytelling in that because it's like standard 80s Marvel. But I actually think, no, this Dan Jolley miniseries doesn't want to be a 5-part animated episode script. It wants to be a 12-issue comic where you could do like 2 issues in the 70s and an issue and a half in Chicago, and then an issue and a half in the Wasteland, right? With Ratchet. And here is a piece of evidence that I offer, right? Issue 2 has the Stunticons, none of whom are named. Now, as a big fan of the Stunticons, that made me a little sad because they've got cool names, but also Dan Jolley made a wise decision because none of them do anything in particular that's sort of different from each other, right? Motormaster, who's the big one, the truck, who's in the story has dynamite in the back, who's miscolored in this whole issue. That does make me sad. Motormaster is, in this story, he's not presented as like an opposite number to Optimus Prime, like good 18-wheeler, bad 18-wheeler, the way that they were in an episode of the show. And they don't transform into Menasor. They're just referred to, right? It's like, oh no, there are 5 Stunticons here. This is a problem. We have to keep them apart and like accomplish this. But if you're not going to name them, if they're not going to be distinct, if they're not going to merge into a super robot, all 5 Stunticons combine to form Menasor, why have 5 of them? Just have 2. two of the Stunticons are any two Decepticons who go to 1937 Chicago.
But isn't it potentially the peril, the threat that they're all there together, and if things don't go well, then they could combine, and that will cause a giant problem for them.
Yeah, but doesn't it feel like not a cheat, but it's like, do you want to give the audience what it wants? If you show me the 5 Stunticons, I want to see them combine. It's like, oh, do you guys remember in the second Michael Bay live action Transformers Revenge of the Fallen when the Constructicons showed up and they didn't turn into Devastator? Oh wait, they did. That's awesome. Okay, that movie sucks. I hate it. But like, no, it's exciting when they turned into Devastator. So that's sort of my, since I spent a lot of time on issue 1, that's my comment for issue 2, that I really like. This is when the series becomes itself, when Dan Jolley has or gives himself the time to spend many pages on a smaller group of characters and have them run this mission. It's fun. The car stuff is fun, and the disguises and.
Yeah, the highlight for me too was this lone Viper who's a literal Star Trek, red shirt. That he has got a red shirt, and it's we're on a mission. It's the Baroness, Roadblock, Beachhead, and some random Viper. Okay, why is there the Viper there? He's only there so that he can be killed at some point during this mission, and so he's on this constant state of panic. And then at the very end of the issue, he comments on it. He's like, "They've got back, and hey, I'm still alive."
Okay, so can we jump to issue 3 now?
Yep.
Okay, so, all right. When I get to the end of issue 2, the back cover to issue 2, which teases issue 3, has the cover to issue 3 cover A, right? So the image on the back of issue 2, one of the covers for issue 3, is a giant Transformer. I don't know who it is.
Okay.
He's a Decepticon, but to me, he looks like Nightbeat because of his eyes and his color scheme. Nightbeat is blue and yellow, and he investigates mysteries. And I'll stop talking about Nightbeat because this is definitely not Nightbeat. Nightbeat becomes a car or a buggy or something. And this is a building or 2 buildings or like a subway station or something. Okay, so the one of the covers to issue 3, there's this giant Decepticon. He's yellow and blue, and he's holding at a very strange angle a crumbling Statue of Liberty. And I'm going to give E.J. Sue a break here. I think the reason why this Decepticon is holding the Statue of Liberty so awkwardly is because that's the reference photo that E.J. Sue found. And on the cover, this giant Transformer has these very strange, like, shoulder columns. Like, it's like, if you know the original Ultra Magnus toy or the design in the animation, it's like the white stacks coming out of his shoulders, 4 times as thick, 8 times as tall. So it's like, okay, I don't know what he transforms into, but I'm starting to think he transforms into a skyscraper because he's standing on this cover to issue 3 in either the ocean or like sea rise flooded New York City, because behind him is the Chrysler Tower, like adrift in this ocean, right? Like Armageddon, apocalypse, like sea level rise ocean. Okay. So I don't know who this guy is, but he's really big. He's a bad guy. This is like a terrible future or present for New York. And I thought, oh man, issue 3, the stakes are getting high. Okay, but we're not at issue 3 yet, right? I've just gotten through issue 2. I like it a lot more than issue 1. It's got this fun stuff with the Viper and Baroness and the Stunticons. And then the final page jumps to another time and another place. And now we see what happens to the 3rd squad of Joes and Cobras who are sent somewhere. And one of them, I can't tell who because he's in silhouette, says, it must be Mindbender, says, ugh, this feels worse every time it happens. And then Tomax and Zaymot say, oh my God. And then Barbecue says, what are we looking at? And then a little blurb says, next, future shock. This is the final panel of issue 2. Okay, what do I see them looking at? They are standing on some high up surface, and they're looking out over like some, I'm going to guess, New York skyscrapers that are like at angles. They're not standing upright. And the ground all around them has like started to swallow them up and sort of frozen. I don't know if it's like dirt or ice. I think it's dirt. But the sort of ground level has come halfway up these skyscrapers. In the distant background are two silhouettes for like Titans, right? The term came a little later, but Titans are the largest transformers, like Metroplex. And I think Omega Supreme is technically a Titan. And those are the ones that transform into bases and cities, right? And in the middle ground, there is what looks like the waist and leg and sort of feet of the guy who's on the back cover, the guy who's on the cover to issue 3, the yellow and blue guy who maybe transforms into a skyscraper. And on this final panel of issue 2, where Barbecue says, "What are we looking at?" we seem to be looking at 3 of these guys. And one of them is in the foreground, not the foreground, he's in the middle ground. And there are some lines around his legs as if he's like shaking, some motion lines. And we never see him again. So, Mark, what do I do with that?
I don't know. I think we have to make our peace with this fact in our own ways, Tim.
Okay, so
yeah,
so I pick up issue 3, and the art has changed, and I said this in other episodes of Talking Joe, issues where Tim Seeley doesn't draw the issue or doesn't draw all the issue, and Emiliano Santalucia shows up to pencil the issues. I'm really psyched because I think he's stronger technically at the human figure, at acting, at compositions, even though this issue is going off of Tim Seeley's layouts. So the first panel of issue 3 picks up a moment later, right? Where these 5 Joes and Cobras, Barbecue saying, I don't get it. I thought we were supposed to go to Earth. And Mindbender says, it's the future. And in that second panel, we're looking at buildings like skyscrapers, and some of them are like leaning against each other. And there are some sweeps who's this futuristic Decepticon like flying through the air. And then they meet the like Mad Max futuristic dreadnoks who have Wreck-Gar motorcycles. That's a guy's name, Wreck-Gar.
It's Eric Idle off of Transformers the movie.
Yes, not in the show, just the movie, but yes. So this is when I started to think, because there's this, we think maybe typo at the end of issue 3. We're on the news checklist page. It refers to the next month, issue 4, and the next month, issue 5. And I started to think several things. One, am I missing an issue? I'm not saying that as a joke. For a second, I thought like, oh, did I read this out of order? So, you could grab a miniseries and by accident you read 1, 3, 2, 4.
Ironically, Barbecue's first line of the issue, I don't get it. Tim's thought also when he starts reading this issue.
Right. This is when I started to think maybe Blaylock said to Dan Jolley, oh, now that you've started writing this, you have to change this. Or, hey, we were going to do 5 issues, now we're going to do 4. Or there was or Hasbro said, you have to change something. And Devil's Due made the best it could of a tough situation. Or I thought, maybe this will get explained in the next issue. But by the end of issue 3, I thought, what is this? It's like, I turn to the middle and I look at the staples. They're not technically staples, but I'll call them staples. Like, did 20 pages fall out of my comic? Am I only reading half the issue by accident? Because there've already been these small things, like they have these disruptors and these trackers that aren't really visually introduced or differentiated. And issue 1 was jam-packed with like Earth and then Cybertron and then a fight and then the zapping and then the first mission. And then issue 2 was good and sort of breathed. And then issue 3, I thought, okay, well, the actual mission that's happening here, I like, and the art is an improvement. And, seeing Duke as he's no longer a believer. He's a doubter. He's not a bad guy, but he's so bitter. He like won't send them back into the time stream. That's fun and upsetting. And so as I turn the page and, the Dreadnoks are helping them sneak into the city, And I'm like, okay, now they're going to meet this giant skyscraper transformer titan. It's like, oh, they're the Insecticons. Okay. So we're going to get through the Insecticons. And I turn the page. Okay, now we're going to meet the giant skyscraper transformer. Oh, no. It's Ravage. It's a bunch of Ravages. The Jaguar cassette who lives inside Soundwave. Like, okay, now we're going to meet, it's Ratchet. Ratchet's sort of the last Autobot freedom fighter. Oh, what an interesting wrinkle. He showed up 2 years ago. So Jolley is introducing now an interesting, what's the word? Sort of inconsistency, a good one, not a mistake or a lazy one, where in the 2 previous missions, the Joes and Cobras showed up pretty soon after the Transformers, just long enough for them to be like stolen basically as cars by random bad guys and or Beastie Boys. And here they showed up 2 years after Ratchet, and he's become a true believer, a freedom fighter, the last freedom fighter. He's sort of like dented and charred and scratched. And I have a note here that in issue 3, this reference is only going to work for a minority of our listeners, but page 16, when Ratchet takes out a reflector, for one page, this comic just becomes Transformers Generation 2, which is to say that comic was much darker and grittier than the original Marvel Transformers. A lot more black ink, a lot more gritted teeth, a lot more Transformers dying and getting shot and like having their sort of robot guts hanging out of little holes and like oil spilling out. And I thought, oh, here's this one page where like in the future, Ratchet takes out this bad guy. So what do you make of issue 3, Mark?
Yeah, it's fine. I think, dystopian futures are always interesting to see. Quite enjoyed it. Not a huge amount extra to see. I mean, it's sort of just interesting to see some of that takes on the Dreadnoks, the take on Duke, and it all makes sense. There's probably something happening behind the scenes editorially between last page of issue 2 and the first page of beyond that. It's fine. I was doing some Googling in the background and learning about Titan Transformers, and it looks like pretty much the only contender that I can see is a Decepticon called Metro Titan.
Yeah, but these aren't his colors.
But also, we're on in a different continuity as well, where all of the Transformers are looking slightly different to the way they did look. Yeah, I mean, there's not a huge amount of similarities to the same design, apart from kind of those ear cones and the shoulder turrets and the size. But maybe that's where they were going. Yeah,
for novice Transformers fans, if you know who Metroplex is, Metro Titan is the Metroplex toy released in Japan with different colors, and more recently in America in the comics, Metro Titan was introduced as a different character.
As this was causing us so much confusion, I actually asked E.J. Sue if he remembered who that massive transformer on the cover was supposed to be.
So the giant Decepticon on the cover of issue 3 was never supposed to be anything more than a generic city bot that kind of step on everything in a future Earth. When Decepticon took control, it was supposed to be these overpowering force that it looks like nobody could ever overcome. At the end of the script on issue 2, describe a world where everything was in ruin, and these gigantic robots would just roam the earth and, just step on everything and destroy everything. And we just took a step further and put him on the cover of issue 3.
Here's something else which happens in this issue, which I find interesting and also I wish could be expanded. And if this were 6 issues or 12 issues, I believe this scene would have. Tomax and Xamot grasp each other's wrists, and because they have some of the Cybertronian tech in them absorbed from the first miniseries, they can fire a weapon together, sort of from their hands. And before they get to use it on Shockwave, he, and one of his hands is a laser, vaporizes one of them. And the other screams, "Ah, no!" And then in the next panel, he's pretty small, but he's saying no, and he's on his knees looking down next to a smoking pile of ash. Tomex and Xamot are really fun, wonderful, colorful characters from G.I. Joe animation, from season 2 and the animated movie. Also season 1, right? And Red Rocket's glare. Oh man. And Larry Hama doesn't use them much at all in the Marvel comic or the IDW comic. And when they show up in the Devil's Due comic, that's something that I like, particularly if they act and talk a little bit like the cartoon. In the show and in the toy, this notion is that they're psychically linked. If one is hurt, the other feels it, which is silly and very cool. And that's borne out in the animation. So this scene where one of them dies, we have never seen this in the comics, certainly not in the animation, as of 2004. And it's given one panel to happen and 2 panels for a reaction. And I think we see in the next issue, like the one survivor sort of looking a little adrift in the background of one panel. Most event miniseries at Marvel and DC, and most intercompany crossovers, like Superman, Spider-Man from the 70s, or JLA Avengers from, 1997? There's rarely time in a big event miniseries or an intercompany crossover for, to my mind, enough or the right sort of emotional beats. So in a 4-issue miniseries like G.I. Joe vs. Transformers 2, I need some moments. I need things to slow down. And like issue 2 and much of issue 3 do slow down for those 2 missions. The Baroness and Beachhead's dialogue with the Viper, and this thing in issue 2, which feels very much out of the cartoon, where they're at a jazz club and Roadblock just knows how to play trombone?
Trumpet, was it?
Trumpet, thank you. Right? It's like, what's the one thing we know about Roadblock outside of his military career? He's a gourmet chef. Does Dan Jolley use that? No. Is that okay? Yes. No, actually, yes. I don't need him to do the one thing that he does and that he's done before. Does this come out of nowhere? Yes. Would the cartoon have done that? Absolutely. And that's why I'm okay with it. And the panel before it, where the 2 other jazz performers, one says, "We ain't even heard him play. Are you going to argue with the man?" "No, I ain't either." And then there's a panel where the band starts to play and there are no sound effects with musical notes, but okay. And like the Baroness walks off. This is in issue 2.
Yep.
I really need a little more with Tomex and Xamot. And if this was 12 issues, or if each of these missions was about finding one Transformer, not 5 or 6. It's like, okay, we're going to find Optimus Prime and the Stunticons. It's like, oh man. It's like, no, the reason why you'd have Optimus Prime and the Stunticons is so that Optimus Prime and the Stunticons can fight. Otherwise, if it was just one Decepticon or just Optimus Prime, it could be interesting enough to just try and sort of peel him away from the human who's got him. Or you could have a chase scene with Optimus Prime and one Stunticon, right? But it's like, I keep coming back to this note, but sort of almost half of the scenes in this entire miniseries have like the maximum number of characters, and half of the scenes have a sort of medium and proper amount of characters, but no scenes have sort of the minimum number of characters. And the fewer characters, the more you can slow down and have a character do something else or have some dialogue. So that is my very long plea for another couple of panels of Tomex or Xamot, I'm not sure who survived, reacting.
Okay. So what do you think then, Tim, of the grand finale and how this all wraps up in issue 4?
I was really distracted in issue 4. The art looks rushed, and I do like Val Staples' coloring separate from this comic. I think his palette is so different for this final issue. It's quite distracting. The fight that happens sort of around Teletran 3 in Cybertron, like all the backgrounds are really bright and the sky is like light purple, and Cybertron has no atmosphere. The sky in Cybertron, day or night, is just sort of the black of space with white stars. So sorry, that's wrong. And if it's not wrong, it just feels inconsistent from the previous issues. I thought the Dinobot reveal was really fun. And I will point out that I had not seen the cover of issue 4 that has Dinobots on it. That is not an ad at the end of issue 3. I don't have that cover for issue 4. I have cover B. And so I had forgotten halfway through issue 4 that there was one last group of Joes and Cobras who had gone somewhere. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so when all of a sudden Lady J pushes a button and there's a big like lightning bolt explosion and some Joes come out of it, and it's Roadblock, Dusty, someone, and Shipwreck. And there are like the smallest indications on this one panel that they've been somewhere, sort of, their clothes are torn and they've got, Dusty has like animal teeth sort of as a necklace, right? And Roadblock is holding a spear, like a Stone Age type spear, like a wooden staff with like, stone tied to it with string. And he says, man, oh man, you will not believe where we've been. And then there's this very awkwardly composed splash page of the Dinobots coming out of the like time portal.
That group of characters, by the way, I just flicked back to issue 1 to see who was in that group. And it looks to be Shipwreck, Gung Ho, Dusty, and another random Viper.
Okay. So I thought two things that conflicted at the same time. I thought, oh, how fun. Dan Jolley is really efficiently, and as a surprise, bringing back in the final group of characters, that their mission was a success. And, oh man, it's sort of underexplained. I'm going to have to make a little leap here. Dusty doesn't say we went to prehistory. Dusty says, you won't believe where we've been. And there are these 2 visual cues in their costumes. And then I see dinosaurs. Oh, they didn't become 1930s cars or 1970s cars. They became dinosaurs. I thought, that's really fun. And then I thought, wait a minute, this is happening halfway through the final issue. Did that mission, did that scene, did that like first half of part 5 of the animated miniseries want to be a bigger story that we could actually sink our teeth into?
I don't know. I think I like it as a surprise that you don't actually see the story. You just see the ramifications of the story. It happening off panel it's okay with me, because if you were to explain it, it would lose the bit of the fun of the reveal that all of these Dinobots appear out of nowhere.
Right. I do have a question for you, issue 4. On pages 2 and 3, Storm Shadow, his jacket is torn on his back, and his back is scuffed up, and it looks maybe like it's smoking. Is that something that just happened in the fight? Does that happen at the end of issue 3 off panel when Ratchet has teleported back to where Shockwave is by Teletran 3?
I think this is something that has happened off panel. I think the suggestion is that Storm Shadow has been on a reconnaissance mission. All of these other Joes have returned from their mission, are sort of hiding away. He's been off on a mission to try and find out some stuff. And yeah, he comes back and he finds the information they need.
Okay. Well, so, I'm often asking for more things to be shown and not told. And I like the attempt here that, some story has happened between the previous issue and the current one. I often say how much I like that in Larry Hama G.I.JOE comics, right? One of my favorite examples is the first page of issue 97, which definitely doesn't pick up, an hour or a day after the end of the Snake Eyes trilogy in issue 96. It's like, no, we're just into the next mission and some other Joes are pinned down behind a car getting shot at. I think that's the first page of 97. So I appreciate that. And, you know, there is a little bit in the dialogue here where Storm Shadow says, everyone shut up and listen. I have what we need. I managed to stay hidden for a few extra seconds. Okay. And then CoverGirl does point it out. She says, you're back. But that sort of injury is so specific. I think it actually asks more questions than it dramatically suggests. I think I still have more questions. It's like, it's not so literal that I need to know which Transformer used what weapon to do that to Storm Shadow. But that is so specific. Again, after the whole thing where the guy who is a building appears but doesn't appear, I saw this page and I thought, wait, did I miss a scene or an issue?
Yeah.
Because it's not like he's just running and he's panting and he's tired and he's sweaty, or like he has a sword, but it's like broken in half. I mean, I might say the same thing if his sword was broken in half. Although, you know, maybe fighting alien robots, your sword breaks in half. But it's like, no, was it a laser beam? Did like a door close right behind him? And like, did someone have like a heat ray or fire breath? And then Dan Jolley or Tim Seeley, just in his layouts, creates a mini narrative out of CoverGirl and Storm Shadow, because she, along with everyone else, sees him on this first splash page. It's page 2 of the final issue. Seeley very awkwardly crops half of Roadblock's head behind a pipe. Weird. And then on the next panel, right, CoverGirl leans in and she says, and her dialogue is a little smaller and the second word's in italics. She says, you're back. And her hands are out. And then several pages later, after Lady J and Roadblock have pushed the button and the Dinobots have shown up, the next day Optimus Prime is sort of explaining that the story's now over and everyone can go home. And someone says off panel, the debt's hardly one-sided, Prime. Without the Autobots' help, Shockwave wouldn't have just dominated Earth. He'd have demolished it. And there's a beat where this panel is actually, some Joe off screen is responding to Optimus Prime, but what we see actually are CoverGirl and Storm Shadow exchanging looks. And that's really nice. Maybe Tim Seeley, I think he writes the third crossover.
Yep.
Maybe he's setting up something for the future because he knows what the final page of this issue is, and maybe he knows he's going to write the third one. Maybe he's just adding a little bit of inter-character business, some acting, some stuff that doesn't hinge on the dialogue, because you don't actually need this panel to be Stalker or whoever like talking back to Optimus Prime. So I like it, but at the same time, because Storm Shadow has this question mark about his mission and his costume and his injury, as much as I like this panel, I feel like this panel is asking more questions than it's answering. Like, oh, I guess they like each other now, or I guess she appreciates his bravery and he appreciates her concern. And like, if it wasn't there, these 3 beats of her seeing him, saying you're back, and then this exchange, this visual exchange, if this weren't there, yes, this 4-issue miniseries would be a little less rich for it. But there's a weight to adding this 3-beat interaction that doesn't come from anywhere and doesn't go anywhere. And then at the end of the story, I like this idea that Cobra Commander has sort of the final word, because Starscream is left. Shockwave is angry at him or disappointed. Shockwave is going to let Starscream sort of stay. He's not going to be punished. He's welcomed back into the ranks. Starscream is embarrassed because he was, captive of Cobra on Earth. So this sort of closes a loop, what is about to happen from the first miniseries. And so then this recording plays from within Starscream, which is Cobra Commander saying that Starscream is terrible and he's filled with explosives. And there's this wordless panel of Shockwave lunging towards Starscream, either to attack him or to like defuse the bomb. And then there's this exterior shot. It's 2/3 of the page of this building from the outside exploding. And there's this like light purple sky behind it. Sorry, Val Staples. That's not what Cybertron looks like. But because the word balloon placement, where Cobra Commander finishes explaining, but it's nothing the 45 pounds of plastic explosive I lined his housing with won't fix. And you think, damn, Cobra Commander has the last word. He killed Starscream, and it turns out Shockwave. Awesome. But we read left to right, so the explosion happens, but then the recording finishes. Wouldn't the recording have blown up in the explosion too?
Yeah, I'll forgive it.
Okay.
I get what you're saying, Tim.
Right.
I get what you're saying. Makes perfect sense, your complaint. But you know, so I can see it as sort of like a cinematic effect as well. That sometimes, you know, that maybe there'll be that element of it's not just possibly the recording that you're hearing, but maybe the person making the recording. You know, I'll allow it.
In a flashback, it's like a week ago when Cobra Commander was speaking into a microphone.
Yeah.
Yes. Or the voice continues in sort of an echoey, like technically it exploded, but for the benefit of the audience, we're going to play the audio a few seconds past the explosion. Sure. But again, the two things you just described are film, not comics.
Yeah. Your complaint would have been resolved if the bubble was top left or something along those lines.
And if there was a long hyphen, a dash, interrupting the final word of it, because it does get cut off in the explosion.
Yeah. We might have mentioned this on the previous crossover, but also the interplay of Starscream and Cobra Commander set in a somewhat cartoon version of the universe has got a little bit of something that tickles me with the kind of the two voices of Starscream and Cobra Commander talking to one another in an animated universe, both voiced by the same person.
All right, so I've spent a lot of time on issue 4 and some things that don't work for me. But how does issue 4 feel to you, and might you focus on the final 2 pages as well?
The resolve is good. It sort of ties it all up. I like the surprise of the Dinobots and the way that kind of explains their origins, that they time traveled a little bit too far and ended up being dinosaurs rather than the standard cars and whatnot. So I think it's a fun storytelling device. The ends page with Dr. Mindbender being taken to some sort of secretive base by, again, secretive people in dark suits, and being introduced to Cobra La, was it Pythona, and Nemesis Enforcer in the background, and they're holding these sort of Unicron artifacts. This looks like Nemesis Enforcer's got kind of a sort of statue of Unicron over the top of his head. There's some sort of shield or plate or something that the guards are carrying, and there's bugs and other things sort of scattered about. It's intriguing, and I believe this is the first comic appearance of Cobra La at this point. So yeah, it's interesting that they leave it on a bit of a mystery, something that can lead somewhere else as well. I think that's an interesting device.
I am not interested, theoretically, in Cobra La appearing in comics. There is that issue of G.I. Joe that was packed in with 2 action figures that Larry Hama writes, Falcon and Nemesis Enforcer, fighting. But this is a very good place to have Cobra La in a either animated inspired G.I. Joe comic or a separate pocket continuity where they're fighting alien robots. And, looking at Tim Seeley's oeuvre and knowing he's our age or about our age, he's definitely a kid who likes the 80s. He actually pitched a book to an artist that I know, which was like sort of a He-Man pastiche many years ago that I don't think ever happened. But even then I thought, like, oh, this guy had drawn G.I. Joe, and, he'd written the 3rd and or 4th Joe Transformers crossovers, and, like Hack Slash is a take on an 80s concept, the final girl. If you don't know what Hack Slash is, that's Tim Seeley's creator-owned comic that he writes and sometimes draws. So it's actually really fun and funny to see Cobra La here, and sort of delightful. Like, yeah, man, you've got this particular take on G.I. Joe where they've now interacted with alien robots. They have that technology, although maybe not after the end of this miniseries. They have time traveled. And Cobra Law is so zany, it sort of makes more sense in G.I. Joe when there's also Cybertron. Like, G.I. Joe, the movie, the animated one from 87, it like starts to peel the layers back, and your comfort level with that much like weird sci-fi, like, oh yeah, it's the 40,000-year-old Snake Man. Yeah. Your mileage may vary. I think G.I. Joe, the movie, is written well enough that I buy it, even if I think about it, I maybe don't want it to be in G.I. Joe, but the show was always much more sci-fi and fantasy than the comic. These two props, I think it's supposed to be stone, the way that it's drawn, although the way that it's colored, it doesn't quite look like stone. But Nemesis Enforcer is holding this sort of stone Unicron sculpture, and its proportions, the fact that it's stone, and then the styling on the shield that the Royal Guard is holding, to me suggest Mesoamerica, that these are artifacts from a part of what is now North America and Central America, as opposed to this page actually has a lot of information, this final page, that it's not like the Himalayas necessarily, or like Cybertronian. It's like, no, this feels like a particular thing, and even down to the beetles coming out of the sort of box that I guess the shield was in. I think it's really funny that in addition to the stone statue, which has particular proportions where the body is a little small and the head's a little big, and the shield, one of the Royal Guard is also just holding a box of files. Like, it's like, okay, I think that's fine. I think that's fair. I think when you like call it out, it's silly. And what you sort of want is these weird sci-fi characters to be holding interesting artifacts, and there to be boxes of files on the shelving around them. Anyway, I do like this page, and I don't love it when a miniseries wraps up and then the final page teases the next miniseries, and like every Marvel event, and then DC finally learned this 5 years ago. Now DC event, it's like, the event miniseries, its final couple of pages just set up the next one distinctly. And so if you read it at the time, you immediately think like, oh, well, as much as I enjoy that ending, or don't, like, here's the publisher sort of hitting me in the face. It's like, you got to buy the next thing, sucker. Or if you reread it many years later, or if you give, the book, the collection as a gift to someone, what? Anyway, so congratulations, Devil's Due. I'm gonna have to read G.I. Joe versus Transformers 3.
And strangely enough, I think G.I. Joe versus Transformers 3 doesn't touch on that storyline at all. It's all about a Serpentor storyline. But I think
I've read 4. I have read 4. I'll jump ahead several episodes of our podcast, even though I had given up on Devil's Due when Black Horizon came out, G.I. Joe versus Transformers 4. I did buy it and read it at the time because Andrew Wildman drew it, and that was cool.
Okay, and that is where we see these characters next. We spoke to Tim Seeley recently and asked him about that Cobra Law cameo. Because
originally the cameo that we had in 2 of Cobra Law was like just a joke. Because Hasbro's like, you don't use them. They're are sort of ashamed of them. We don't want to use them. So it's just like a joke.
Short but sweet. Back to Mark and Tim Finn. I wanted to return to something you'd mentioned earlier on, which was that you didn't like my reference to Teletran 3 as a MacGuffin. I have two questions. One, why is that? And 2, is Teletran 3 is it something that exists already, or is it a brand new invention for this comic?
It's one of those comic book extensions of something already existing. The computer in the original Transformers cartoon, their ship crash lands on Earth and they take on human forms. And the computer they're always standing around, the computer that they talk to that says like, alert, Decepticon activity detected at the Science Museum, voiced by Casey Kasem. That's Teletran 1. That is the name of their computer. And the episodes of the Transformers cartoon that take place after the animated movie, season 3, that has Teletran 2, who I think was voiced by, Frank Welker. I think Casey Kasem had left the show in protest for a character that had a name that was an offensive joke. I don't know if any other comics or animation have had up until this point in 2004 named any kind of successor or alternate version of an Autobot computer Teletran 3, but that's what this is. That's either Dan Jolley took a swing and guessed right, or Blaylock or Seeley made a suggestion. So yes, in this story, it does act like a MacGuffin, but it is enough of a Transformers prop or character that I think of it as a little more elevated than a MacGuffin. The other reason why my eyes go to that name Teletran 3 immediately in issue number 1 is my first error detected.
Error detected. Error detected. No prize incoming.
Teletran is spelled incorrectly in this comic. I forgive it because in sort of half of all Transformers lettering and text, it's spelled wrong. The actual spelling, it's a double A in the second half of the word. T-E-L-E, Tele, and then Tran is T-R-A-A-N. That's canon.
Uh-huh. I had one real sort of slightly tongue-in-cheek error detected, and that is issue 1, page 2, the first appearance of the Dreadnoks, and their dialogue is, "Oh ho ho, you've just made a blue, mates. London to a brick you have. Tear them apart." I was like, what language are you speaking? Are you meant to be Cockneys? Is that English or Australian? I have no idea what you're trying to do there. God blimey, governor, mate. No mistake. I don't know.
I think this might call for a very specific follow-up email to Dan Jolley. This is the one question, not where the City Titan went, but what's up with his dialogue?
And then the subsequent one was they then sort of released their sort of Cybertronian cybernetics. Ripper's got a sort of bayonet, giant ripping hands. Buzzer's got a chainsaw hand. Torch's got torch hands, and Ripper jumps at Scarlet and says, "Been waiting to get my hands on you, lassie." I think you'll find, Ripper, that is, you've been waiting to get your hand on Scarlet because you only have one.
I wish there was a panel between these two panels you've just referred to, the one where they first show up and they have these two lines of dialogue that you think are funny and weird, and they look normal, and Ripper is just making a fist and pointing with his other hand. And then the next panel where all of a sudden it's sort of not clear if Ripper has like taken his hand off and put an attachment on, like a Cobra bat, where he now has a blade, or if like Claw, Ulysses Claw in the Black Panther movie, if his hand like split in half and like folded back, and a like blade stuck out, isn't it, of his wrist. Yeah. And like in that second panel, we see Torch, and his whole, from his fingertips down to his elbows, are like metal gauntlets with flame coming out of the fingertips. In the previous panel, we just see his head and shoulders. So are his hands already metal, or is that part of the transformation? And this is a nitpick, and you'd need like 2 extra panels or like an inset panel. But like it's sort of like if in one panel you have Optimus Prime and then the next panel you have an 18-wheeler, I do want to see sort of 2 or 3 drawings, whether it's sort of colored in sort of fuzzy, translucently, or some inset panels where he is mid-transformation, because that's so cool and fun. And on the cartoon, particularly with the sound effect. So like the surprise of this scene, and when Tomax and Zaymot do it, I do want a little more sort of space given to this thing that could only happen in this miniseries. Because it's not just like, I have a machine gun, and then in the next panel, it is firing. Or I'm like holding a clip, and in the next panel, I've loaded the clip.
I've just Googled, actually, it's London to a brick, just to double check. And apparently it is a colloquialism that occurs in Australia, I guess, where the dreadnoughts hang about. So it's when something is assured or certain. It's London to a brick that Kevin's going to be late again, i.e. Kevin is always late. So maybe I'm being a bit too hard on him.
I hope you will send a second email to Dan Jolley rescinding the question of your first one, and now offering up as a replacement question from my co-host Tim, what's up with that building guy? I have an error detected in issue number 2.
Okay.
On page 10, the Cobra Viper on panel 4 suddenly has Beachhead's shoulder pads. He doesn't have his actual sleeves, his sort of rolled up sleeves like a normal shoulder. Previously and after, every other panel that this Viper appears in this issue, even on this very page, when he's talking to Roblox at the top, he just has his normal rolled up sleeves on his shoulders, blue fabric. But there's this one panel where he's got gray metal shoulder pads, just like... Actually, you know what? Since this is like one of the animated miniseries, the animated miniseries, as the animation went along for both G.I.JOE and Transformers, there started to be a lot of animation mistakes where in regular episodes and in the later miniseries where like someone would move and the movement is not smooth, or there's a color pop, like, you know, someone's shirt is like the wrong color for a half a second.
Yeah. Isn't there like a famous scene where Cobra Commander switches between having the helmet and the hood?
I don't remember specifically, but assuredly yes. Or like someone's mouth moves and like the wrong voice comes out because the animators made a mistake and there wasn't time for the producers in Los Angeles to request a fix. So this little glitch here, where Tim Seeley draws the wrong shoulder pads on the Viper, technically it's an error detected, but I like it. It feels in keeping. It's like, oh yeah, one shot in that episode, yeah, someone's costume's just a little off because it's hard to draw all these characters, and you know, like the other guy's drawing half the characters too.
In the regular show, we've got a little jingle that is a Larry Hammer colloquialism, and I'm not going to make a new jingle for just this episode, but I'll put it on the spot. Let's stop Tim's cynicism. It's time for a Dan Jolley colloquialism. So my colloquialism from Dan Jolley is when Baroness says that she slipped Tommy Fingers a Mickey. So a Mickey Finn, Mickey, is a drugged alcoholic drink given to someone without them knowing. It's named for a late 19th century bartender and pickpocket who was notorious for drugging people's drinks. So giving someone a Mickey Flynn is sometimes called slipping a Mickey.
When it's a bad guy doing it to an even worse bad guy, narratively, this seems like a positive thing. But nowadays in culture, this is only a bad thing. You cannot spike people's drinks. I have 2 I Spies.
I spy with my little eye.
I've slipped mine in as we've gone along, so go for it, Tim.
I Spy in issue 1. There's a reference to hanging chads. It's that Viper who's dangling from some equipment when the Snake Eyes robot is holding him up, and that refers to the voting fiasco in Florida, and also in issue 1, and I think again in issue 4, my I Spy is that Optimus Prime on Cybertron, he's not in his Earth mode where he's got 2 windshields for his chest. He's in a specific Cybertronian mode from a Dreamwave comic, how he appeared in the War Within miniseries, designed and drawn by Don Figueroa. When Dreamwave was making Transformers comics, most of them were in the present day, and there were 2 miniseries. The third one was started and never finished, where Dreamwave brought Simon Furman, who'd written the original Marvel Transformers comics, in to tell some stories of the past on Cybertron. And it's on the cover to issue 1. Optimus Prime has this very specific sort of car chassis as a chest, which is his sort of pre-Earth truck Cybertronian mode. And E.J. Sue is drawing it here in this miniseries.
Very good. Do we do Yo-Joe-age?
Yo-Joe, cola, nut, grape, soda.
It's Yo-Joe-age time.
I'll go first. I think I'll give it this I'll give it a 7. Why not? I quite enjoyed it. It was fun. I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would, with all of the caveats that I said at the beginning about not really generally enjoying Transformers stories. I think this is more of a G.I. Joe story than it is a Transformers story for the most part. As you say, like, some of the Transformers are reduced to bit parts, not even named in the background and so on. I thought it was fun. It zipped along. Some, inventive ideas whenever they're sort of creating these Transformers for the historical scene that they're in. They're doing like a little redesign. So there's a lot of extra work involved in redesigning the characters for their various appearances. But particularly, I think I really enjoyed the art. I think the approach that they took with the backgrounds and the colours was really sympathetic to Tim Seeley's style, and I think it made him look as good as we've seen his art across the issues so far. And yeah, wraps up nicely. So all in all, not a regrettable read, and a lot of fun to be had.
I'm going to give this a 4.
Oof.
I don't think it works. It's fun, and it's got a lot of great scenes, and issue 2 is a fun. I would rank issue 2 much higher. I'd give that a 6. I also like issue 3. But there are so many story problems, and it is so crowded, and I see so many sort of the narrative scenes and threads getting compressed or squeezed out that this needed to be simpler or much longer. But you make a great point. We should, at the beginning of the episode, we should have definitely pointed out that all these Transformers have different designs for the robots they change into in these historical scenes. And that's certainly E.J. Sue doing that design work. I think that's a safe guess. And the process by which this book was drawn is super fun, both sharing the art duties and also painting the backgrounds. Issue 4B, the cover is so great. I'm sort of tempted to just keep that comic in. I have this one short box with just comics that I keep just for the covers because they're so awesome. I just pull them out sometimes and look at them. And this is a contender, although I don't want to break up this set, which I would sell or give to someone now that I've read it for the show. But I do want to recognize that even under the best circumstances, whether it's 6 issues or 12 issues, writing a crossover like this is a big challenge. Yeah. A lot of, it's not just Joes and Cobras and Autobots and Decepticons. It's also Autobot and Decepticon alternate modes. And, we didn't even have G.I. Joe vehicles in this story.
No.
So.
Cool. So I think we are done with G.I. Joe versus the Transformers Volume 2. Next time on Talking Joe Disavowed, we will continue our look at the Brandon Joe era of G.I. Joe with Master and Apprentice Series 2. Is that acceptable, Tim?
Yes. and I know it's 4 issues. I'm not mistakenly thinking that it's 5 or 6. I know it's 4.
So that is your reading homework, listeners. And in the meantime, we will be talking to some special guests. We'll be looking at G.I. Joe original art in some sketchbook special shows and much, much more. Tim, where can people find you when you are not talking to me about G.I. Joe?
Video essays on TV and film at our YouTube page, Atomic Abe Productions. My brick and mortar comic book store is Hub Comics in Somerville, Massachusetts, and I write about G.I. Joe at arealamericanbook.com.
Good. You can find out more about Talking Joe at the usual places. talkingjoe.co.uk is the website with links to all of those places. We've got the podcast, which you are listening to right now. We are on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. We're on email. We've got a thing where you can leave us voicemails. We're also on Patreon, patreon.com, Talking Joe. A big thanks to our backers, Richard, Sam, Jay, Bill, Christopher, Justin, Rob, and Brian, who are getting early access to episodes as well as exclusive content. I think I might even stick the G.I. Joe vs. Transformers preview art on this. There's some interesting things there. And finally, I think that is us done. But remember that
Nobody Beats Talking Joe, an international podcast
with a guy from England, a guy from America, and a bunch of robots from space. See you next time. Laters.